They say competition breeds excellence, and in the case of the sub 4 meter SUV segment, that certainly seems to be true. Take the Ford EcoSport for example. When it was new, it was the one that really popularized this class and it had people flocking to it in droves. But then the competition came knocking really fast and really ferociously. And when it was time for this car's mid-life update that you see here, they added so many changes, it might as well be an all-new car. And speaking of the competition, this car is probably that car's biggest headache. It's the Maruti Suzuki Vitara Brezza, and it is right now the country's best-selling SUV. And that isn't only to do with that badge on its nose. It's got plenty of tricks under its bonnet. And then there's this, it's the Tata Nexon, a car that proved that you don't have to sacrifice sexiness in order to be a big, spacious, practical, comfortable SUV. And finally, the new kid on the block, the Mahindra XUV300. It seems to have taken a page out of all these cars' books and it delivers a really strong package. But just how strong? Well, we've got them all together in diesel manual guise, which is currently the only engine gearbox they're all available in. And we're going to try and find out. But before we go any further, do let us know in the comments which of these cars you like best. And do give us a like and a subscribe and click the bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. And if you haven't already, do check us out on Instagram. And in case you're wondering why this example of the Brezza isn't the latest version with the black wheels that got its update in 2018, that's because Maruti didn't have a car to give us. But since so many people bought them, it wasn't too hard to borrow one from a friend. And don't worry, mechanically, it remains identical. Now dimensionally, it's no surprise that they're all of a similar size since they all have a 4 meter length constraint to fit inside. What's more telling is the wheelbase, where the XUV300 has almost 100mm more than all the others. You'll also find that the curb weights go up from the Brezza's bantam weight 1195 kg to the Nexon and the EcoSport that are close to the 1300 kg mark, all the way to the XUV300 which weighs a full 1405 kgs. Let's not get too deep into the discussion of styling because that can be quite subjective. What I think most will agree on, however, is that while the EcoSport and XUV300 are both well turned out, they look very truncated at the rear, and this is owing to the fact that both started out from vehicles more than 4 meters long and were cut down to size. The Tata and Maruti, designed from the start as sub 4 meter SUVs, are much better proportioned. The XUV300 scores highly for interior quality, especially bits like the infotainment and steering controls. Switches and buttons are really well finished and damped, and plastic quality is generally very good. It's just that the design is a bit incongruous, particularly the HVAC controls inherited from the SsangYong Tivoli, which look rather dated. The EcoSport looks far more cohesive, and in the case of this S model, sportier too. I particularly like the large touchscreen placed at the edge of the dashboard, comfortably in arm's reach. The Ford also has the best instrumentation, with simple but clear dials and a large informative TFT screen between them. You've got to love the Nexon's cabin design, which, much like the exterior, is really attractive. I particularly like the dull grey trim that runs across the center and the way the AC vents are integrated. The trouble is an inconsistency of quality. The dash top has a rich grain and feels premium, but lower down you'll find too many rough edges and iffy switchgear. The Vitara Brezza's cabin feels better put together, but it's let down by dull and cheap looking plastics. The interior design lacks any flair and can be described as functional at best. While the Tata and Maruti are well enough equipped, it's the Ford and the Mahindra that are really pushing the boundaries of this segment. They are, for instance, the only two that offer the much sought after sunroof. Top spec XUV300 is packed with segment firsts like dynamic steering modes, dual zone climate control and heated mirrors. The Nexon uniquely does have driving modes for the engine. They all have touchscreens and all get Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, but it's the EcoSport's interface that is the slickest, quickest and most intuitive. Doesn't hurt that it has the largest screen too. Mahindra's system isn't too bad either, having come a long way since version 1. Maruti's Smart Play interface is clean but quite sluggish in operation. Hopefully they'll upgrade it to the new Smart Play Studio system soon. The Tata's small 6.5-inch screen simply feels the furthest behind though. It's clunky, slow to respond and the screen is quite crowded, none of which you'll want while on the move. All the cars offer 2 airbags as standard across their entire model range, but top spec EcoSports get you 6, and this XUV300 tops that with even a 7th airbag. All cars get rear parking sensors and cameras to help you back up, but the XUV goes a step further with front parking sensors, and while the other 3 have drum brakes at the rear, the Mahindra has discs. When it comes to crashworthiness, comparing them is not so easy. The Nexon famously became the first Indian car to score 5 stars for adult occupant safety in the global NCAP test, and the Brezza wasn't too far behind with 4 stars. The EcoSport scores 4 stars too, but this was in the Euro NCAP test, which has a different scoring system, and it was carried out on a European market EcoSport. The XUV300 hasn't been tested yet, but if it's any indication, the SsangYong Tivoli on which it is based also scored 4 stars on the Euro NCAP test. So make of that what you will. Now let's quickly have a look at what these cars are like if you're sat in the back. There's plenty to like in the back seat of the XUV300. Knee room for one is more than ample. Even a tall person wouldn't have too much of a problem. I also like the fact that it's got 3 headrests for 3 passengers and also 3 3-point seat belts, one for each. That's really cool. There are a few drawbacks though. Headroom, not so great, and the seat is really low, so thigh support isn't too great either. You're sat quite knees up. The back seat is possibly the weakest link in the EcoSport package, thanks to space that just isn't quite as good as some rivals, especially something like a Brezza. And that's a shame because the seat itself is really good. It's really comfortable, it's really supportive, and it feels very plush. You even get a good view out of this large window. The back seat of the Nexon is actually quite a pleasant surprise. You might not think with the sloping roof that there's a lot of room back here, but actually there is. Okay, it's not the class best, but there is still a lot of knee room and quite a decent amount of headroom as well. Okay, this sloping roofline here does cut into visibility a little bit, but it's not a deal breaker. The biggest trump card of this car though is the rear AC vent, which is something the others don't get. The back seat of the Maruti Suzuki Vitara Brezza, and well, they seem to have got all the fundamentals just right. There's loads of space for one. I'm not the tallest person, but as you can tell, there's plenty more room to stretch out. The seat itself is quite comfortable and it's positioned really well so that you get a good view out of this window. It's even got this nice hook over here to hang your luggage. One area the new Mahindra just can't hope to keep up is in the boot. At 257 litres, you'll find more room in some hatchbacks, and it's almost 100 litres down on the EcoSport and Nexon. The Nexon and Brezza's boots at 350 and 328 litres respectively actually feel the most usable here and are well shaped to house any sort of luggage. At 352 litres, the EcoSport might have the largest boot on paper, but the load area is tall and shallow, so it requires you to stack your things vertically. Also, while all the others have conventional hatchback openings, the EcoSport's side hinge door with the heavy spare attached to it can be an inconvenience. And now let's get in and drive, starting with the new Mahindra. The XUV300 impresses the moment you start driving. It starts with the really light clutch and the even lighter gear shift. And then there's the engine itself. Yes, there is a bit of a laggy zone low down, but it's not as bad as some of the others. And when you do cross into the mid-range and the turbo comes on full boost, this thing just flies. It's got the class-leading numbers, and boy, there's that show in the way this car drives. But while the engine has been geared towards performance, the dynamics haven't so much. I mean, look, there's a good amount of body control when you take it around a corner, but the steering just doesn't have a lot of feel in it. It's got weight, and you can dial that up by pressing this steering ferocity button over here, putting it in sport mode. And yes, while it's now got some heft, it just doesn't give you as much feedback from the road as some of the others do. What's also really impressive is that for a car that's riding on such large wheels and what don't look like very high profile tires, it rides really well. Now yes, as we know, the EcoSport is the car that got Indians excited about sub 4 meter SUVs, but you've got to think of why that is. Well, quite frankly, it's because it got the formula right the first time around and everyone has just been playing catch up since. And a very big part of that is the way it drives, from its engines to its chassis. Now with the 2017 facelift, they did play around with the oily bits of this car. They made it a little bit softer in the suspension department, and they tweaked the engines a little bit too. It's now a lot more linear, and frankly it's all the better for it. This feels like the most responsive engine off the line, and you can feel very little of the turbo lag, not as much as you can feel in the others. It pulls so cleanly from low down without any fuss, no hesitation, nothing. And though it may not have the highest outputs in this class, it certainly feels like a fun engine to drive. Now usually someone who enjoys driving would lament the softening of a car's suspension, but here I think they did the right thing. Yes, the original was sharp as a tack, but that came with a very hefty price, and that was ride quality. It felt too stiff and too brittle over most Indian roads. So now yes, they have softened it and it's become much more comfortable and compliant. So has all this softening up ruined the handling? Not in the slightest. The steering, for instance, still remains the sharpest in this class. It's just so precise and gives you so much feedback from the road. You'll absolutely love to chuck this car into corners. Now the Nexon might grab your attention with its really attractive styling, but you'll be happy to know that it has some pretty solid mechanicals underneath as well. It's got Tata's 1.5 litre diesel engine with 110 horsepower and 260 Newton meters of torque, and those are some pretty healthy numbers. In fact, they're second only to the XUV300 in this test. The engine does feel quite strong, but its power delivery isn't quite as forceful as you get in some of the others. It's more linear and more gentle, but the power is all there. The only other shortcoming I can feel in this engine is that at low revs, at light throttle inputs, it can feel quite jerky. What Tata Motors have absolutely nailed with this car though is the suspension and the chassis. Sure, the ride can feel a little bit lumpy at low speeds, but it's not long before it becomes really compliant as you pick up the pace, even just slightly. What's more, the steering feels very good too. It's got a really nice amount of weight to it without being overly heavy, and it feels precise. It really makes you want to steer this car. Now the Vitara Brezza is a very familiar thing if you're familiar with other Marutis, and that includes the engine and gearbox. It's the same tried and tested 1.3 litre multi-jet diesel with 90 horsepower and 200 Newton meters of torque, mated to a 5-speed manual. However, Maruti is very soon going to introduce its own brand new 1.5 litre turbo diesel engine, and this car will probably receive it somewhere down the line. And that's something I'm really looking forward to, because really this engine is one of this car's biggest weak points. There is a lot of turbo lag low down, and at low city speeds you really have to work the gears to get around that. It's alright once you get it into its stride, but that initial phase, which comes in a lot when you're driving in city traffic at low speeds, that can be really annoying. Yes, the ride is a little bit firm at lower speeds, but it's not bad enough for you to really complain about. And it flattens out just wonderfully once you pick up the pace, and it maintains a very good composure out on the highway, which you really like. And it's actually not even that bad a handler, especially by modern Maruti standards, which haven't been very great of late. In a race from a standstill, the XUV300 will crack 100 kph a full second quicker than the rest, in 11.85 seconds. But frankly, it feels like it should have been even quicker. That's likely down to its portly curb weight. You'll admit though that the EcoSport and Brezza's times of 12.75 seconds and 12.96 seconds respectively aren't too shabby in their own right. But what's surprising is that the Nexon is the slowest at 13.68 seconds. And that's likely down to its more relaxed power delivery. As for the all-important fuel economy stakes, the Mahindra didn't fare too poorly, considering its power and its weight. The Brezza returned the best urban figure of 15.3 kpl, while the EcoSport managed the best highway figure of 18.6 kpl. If you saw a pattern forming over the course of this review, you're not alone. Though technically part of the same segment, these cars can be split into two camps based on the way they're spec'd, and this reflects in their prices too. At 11.99 lakh and 11.89 lakh rupees respectively, the top spec XUV300 and EcoSport sit in a sub-segment above the top spec Nexon and Brezza, which are priced at 10.10 lakh and 10.07 lakh respectively. What's more, you can knock off a further 20,000 rupees off the Tata's price and 15,000 rupees off the Maruti's just by choosing a single tone paint scheme, like our friend's Brezza over here. The Brezza is a jack of all trades but a master of only a few. One of those is space, be it in the boot or the back seat, so it's very practical. Beyond that, it gets the basics right but doesn't go out of its way to wow you. You get decent equipment, good fuel economy, and the peace of mind of the Suzuki badge. And while that may be enough for some, it just doesn't feel special enough. When you stretch for an SUV, you expect a bit more. The striking looking Nexon makes a far greater effort to win your heart. Tata's design these days is really pushing the boundaries. It looks a lot more expensive than it is, and this alone could be a big enough reason to pick it. It sacrifices little by way of practicality in the process, with plenty of space and the best ride quality. The trouble lies in the execution. It's not the friendliest to drive in town, the infotainment system needs work, and while the price is low, so is the equipment level. The EcoSport is aggressive on the outside, sporty on the inside, it's well equipped, and that's all before you've even prodded the starter button. If you enjoy driving, this is the one you'll want, with really sharp dynamics and little detriment to comfort. However, it just doesn't work well enough as a family car, as the back seat simply isn't as spacious as any of the others. It's expensive too, and yes, so is the XUV300, but in the Mahindra you feel like you're getting more for your money. Apart from a woefully small boot, there's little else to seriously mark the XUV300 down on. In fact, it's class leading in almost every way. The strongest performance, the longest equipment list, and loads of segment firsts make it objectively the best car here. But then it all comes at a price that parks it precariously close to the Hyundai Creta. Could it possibly be worth that much? If your budget is extremely tight, you could still go with the Nexon, which gets you a lot of feel-good factor for the money, but ultimately it's still the Mahindra that wins this test. Not this W8O variant, however, because it's simply too expensive. For a whole 1.19 lakh rupees less, we'd recommend the standard W8, which loses some of those segment first features but still remains a stronger package than the rest. So yes, the XUV300 is the best car in this class, and you don't even have to stretch your budget as far as you might think.